Today's episode is brought to you by the Local Palate Cookbook Club.
A lot of people talk about how to get a literary agent to represent you, but what happens next? Today, we're going to talk about it. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kate Leahy, and today I'm here with Molly Stevens. Hey, Molly.
Hello, Kate.
Molly, I want to give people a little peek behind the curtains of how this episode comes together. We don't always do this, but I thought in this case, we're really going inside baseball today, and why not, show people how we got there?
Right.
I'm going to use all the cliches I can in this opener. I wrote a book with Chronicle Books. It came out in 2019. I recently was invited to come back in to see what Chronicle was doing, just for fun, just for sort of podcast research. I sat down with Keely, one of the publicists. I told her what we do for the podcast. She was sort of bouncing off ideas of how she could help. And I said, one of the things I really wanted to do was to get an author on and an agent on and talk about how they work together to sell a book to a publisher.
Right. Because we've had lots of authors and we've had a few agents, but to have them together.
Yeah.
I love it.
She went back and said, let me see what I can do. She sends us this email the following week. She had told me already about Peter Kim, who's come out with this beautiful new book, Instant Ramen Kitchen. And she said, what if we brought Peter on with his agent, David Black? And so then I sent you an email. What'd you think?
Well, I was like, yes, because that this is a book that Sarah Billingsley at Chronicle, when she was on last season, said she was excited about. So it was one of the titles they're excited about for the fall. But David Black is an icon in the industry. He has represented Dory Greenspan, Vivian Howard, Francis Lamb, Hunter Lewis. The list goes on, and plus a lot of non-cookbook people. He's a big deal, right? And he's been around for quite a while. He's very established, sees the trends, owns his own agency, and probably isn't taking on that many, if any, new authors. So one, I was like, yeah, it would be amazing to speak to David Black. But then also to know that David Black, some of his stature, is working with a relatively unknown, debut cookbook author. Not unknown in the world, but certainly not a name in the cookbook world.
When we had Sarah Billingsley on, she kind of told us what makes a Chronicle book. And it seemed that, yes, you can have a big platform, but there's other ways to think about platform. And I think Peter's whole career is sort of this exercise in thinking about platform in different ways. He's had his sort of finger on the pulse of what's going on in food and food culture for so many years. And he has a platform. It's just not like visible on like Instagram followers. It's like real life platform, which is, I think, really exciting, actually.
Incredible experience and expertise. He started the Museum of Food and Drink in Brooklyn.
Who starts a museum?
Right. A food and drink museum. Yep. He had a podcast with Food 52 that was food and music. It's called Counter Jam. It's a really, they're not making it anymore, but it's a really good listen.
Yeah. He's been featured in the New York Times, in the New Yorker, NPR. It's really interesting, too, because at what point, you have all this experience in food and food culture, and you have a museum. At what point do you decide to write a cookbook, a single subject cookbook specifically? It's not the most obvious step.
Right. So the book, Instant Ramen Kitchen, and when I first saw it, I was like, what is this? And I certainly had instant ramen on camping trips and think of it as dorm food and all of that. I was like, I don't know what's going on with this book. How do you even describe it?
It's one of those books that if you are curious about flavor pairings and ways to think strategically about flavor and food and how these things can come together, I feel like this is a book that you should have on your shelf. It's one of these books where the first half is actually a really hardworking section on not only instant ramen history, but also just like ways to think about food and flavor and how to put those building blocks together. And then the second half are these recipes. And in the conversation, we talk about like the parameters he puts on the recipes. They're very specific. And it's like when I've done development work for clients, sometimes I'm given these parameters where I can have no more than 10 ingredients. I have to have only 3 steps. and it has to be ready like in no longer than an hour. And sometimes having these, what would you call them, like guardrails, like parameters, like they kind of force you to be creative in ways you wouldn't have necessarily thought to do.
Well, and this whole book it's about creativity, as Peter will tell us. It's not that the instant ramen is just a vehicle for his treatise on creativity and improvisation in the kitchen. He truly believes that instant ramen is I'm a convert. I love the history part about the noodles, but also the whole section on the different kinds of the field. He calls it a field guide to instant ramen, and talks about the different brands, what their profiles are, and it's into telling you how to cook with them. And I kind of can't wait to make some ramen lunches.
Yeah.
No, it's a really interesting book, and I think they're a very interesting pair. It makes a lot of sense that they are working together, and we learned a ton talking to them, I would say.
Yeah, I think we're really lucky that this came together, and I want to thank Keely at Chronicle for helping us make it happen.
Let's get to it.
Peter and David, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
It's great to be on.
It's great to be with you all.
Great to have you here. Obviously going to get into Peter's new book, Instant Ramen Kitchen, but before we do, what came first, the author-agent relationship or the idea for the book?
So I guess it was, 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago. I have to say I got quite fortunate because an editor from Chronicle reached out to me. They had actually heard my podcast. They had this idea that they wanted to share with me for a book on food. I thought about it, and I actually wasn't crazy about the idea, at least not for me. It just didn't seem to really fit with my area of expertise. And so I ended up coming back to them with an idea of my own. I was like, well, you know what? I learned to cook using instant ramen. It's a dish, a product that's really important to me. And I see a lot of potential for building something out with this. It's actually something I've been kicking around my head for a while. I taught some classes on cooking with instant ramen, and I'd already sort of noodled on the idea, so to speak. And they seemed interested. At that point, I actually reached out to a dear friend of mine, Francis Lamb, over at Clarkson Potter. I asked him for advice on just how to approach this whole process, because I was very excited about the idea of doing a book, but it was, far from certain. He gave me some tips on just putting a proposal together, and then he said, "Do you have an agent?" And I said, "Oh, I didn't even know I was supposed to have an agent." No, I do not. He was kind enough to say, "Well, listen, if you want a good agent, I've got the guy for you." And I was leaning in, "Yes, who is it?" He was like, "You got to talk to David Black." And so he was very kind to set up an introduction between the two of us, and that's how that got started.
David, I'm curious to know from your perspective, so many people have reached out to you through the years wanting to work with you, wanting you to be their agent. What was it about the meeting with Peter that you said, okay, I want to work with this guy. He's got something here?
It was interesting. I mean, when first at sort of this point in stage of a career, many, if not most of the new clients that I take on are either people that I seek out or people who were referred to me. If Francis says to me, pay attention, pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, Peter's great people. He's got a really good idea. You should talk with him. So I said, game on.
And was the idea at that point, Peter, was it the Instant Ramen Kitchen?
Yeah, it was actually at that point called Instant Flavor. That was my initial title for it. A lot of it was there. There were other elements to the book that later got taken out. It was initially a lot more focused on recipes, but the idea evolved in interesting ways to become what it is now. And actually, the evolution came along through my work in music as well, and so that kind of inspired that. Just speaking with the first conversations I had with David, do you actually even cook with instant ramen?
I don't know that I ever have, Peter. Maybe decades ago.
Yeah.
Decades ago.
I think it's really a testament to David that I had the sense, David, that this was not something that you grew up with like me. But, I laid out the idea for him, and he just instantly kind of grasped the concept and the potential for it. Helped me also think about how to shape the idea, and both he and Francis gave me such good advice on the proposal. I think one thing I realized is that your book proposal is part of it is laying out your dream idea, but much of it is really a business plan actually for how this is going to sell. I think those were really good nudges that I got both from David and Francis to really sharpen up my proposal and make it less about, I mean, it's important why this is a great idea, but also having a very heavy focus on why and how this will sell.
I mean, Molly, you're particularly aware of stuff like this too, right? But the goal of a proposal is twofold. First and foremost, it is a blueprint, and it is a blueprint for the author. In that instance, it is not a selling tool, and it shouldn't be a selling tool, because what you want is you want to let the material sell itself. My feeling is that editors are pitched every day, endless numbers of times. I actually, at one point, had a series of conversations with editors around the industry, because I would have clients who I'd asked to do proposals, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 times, and they would get very frustrated.
Before sending them to an editor.
Yes, yes. And they would get very frustrated and angry with me, right? Why am I doing this again? But those conversations with the editors gave me some information that was really helpful. I'd say, how many proposals do you guys get a week? And they'd say 10, 20, usually 20, 25. I'd say, okay. I said, how many books do you buy in a year? And they'd say 10, 15, maybe. I said, so you get anywhere from 1,000 to 1,250 proposals a year, and you buy 20 or make offers on 20. And so you have to say no between 980 and 1,230 times. Therefore, your job is to say no. It is not to say yes. And so when I sit down and I talk to a client and they say, well, I don't want to do it for the 12th time, I say, well, here are the numbers. Your odds stink.
Right.
Okay. You don't want to do it again. We hear no. You get one shot, because you go into a publisher with a proposal and the publisher says no. And then you say, well, I want to redo it. And it sits in their notes. So it gets a lot harder to come back to them.
Right.
There is great value in a proposal. And, Peter did a really good job of crafting one. There are questions that publishers increasingly ask about an author's platform and the way that they can reach that author's platform, and or to what degree this is an idea that will fit into what they're looking to do. And in the instance of this book, there was a vision at Chronicle to publish this book. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking certainly to make the best deal you can for your client, but you're also looking for a publisher and an editor that has the vision to be able to publish this and to be able to reach an audience. Because too often now, publishers are relying solely on an author's audience in order to sell a book. They've done a little of this with you, Peter, but they also have their own ideas, which has been kind of nice to see. But they will come to you and say, well, who do you know? How do we reach them? They are looking to reach an author's audience as opposed to amplifying an author's vision. In my eyes, the role of a publisher is to amplify an author's vision. That's the way you reach a broad audience. Otherwise, what you end up with is a book that reaches an author's niche audience, and then you're done.
And that's it. Yeah. You started talking to Chronicle, Peter, before you started talking to David. And then Francis Lamb, who's at Potter, got involved. David, did you know it was going to be a Chronicle book? Did you pitch it to others?
When a publisher has developed a relationship with an author, even as you're coming in as an agent, I think you have a responsibility as an agent to honor the relationship and not to be a cowboy.
Yeah.
This is not a matter of saying to Chronicle, hey, thank you very much. I'm going to shop this to the world.
Yeah.
In an instance like this, particularly when something is so specific. If you're representing somebody who covers the New York Knicks for The Athletic, publisher says, I want to publish this book, and 6 publishers say, I want to publish a book about the New York Knicks, you have a little less of an obligation. But here you have a real obligation, a moral obligation, to be able to have a conversation and see if it can work.
Yeah.
The one thing that you can't do is you can't be in a position where you have to make it clear to the publisher, we're not taking any offer you make. Okay. There may be a slight discount for the passion you will bring to the project, but you're going to pay my client fairly.
Yeah.
You don't pay him fairly? Thanks a lot. We're out.
This was actually one of the early ways that David was so helpful. As a first-time author, I'll be honest, I didn't really know what the difference was between Chronicle and W.W. Norton and Clarkson Potter and so on. I really didn't know how to approach this because I think especially when you don't have any experience under your belt, you're worried about getting a fair shake. I didn't know whether I should now shop this around, and David was very clear that we focused the conversation on working this out with Chronicle. Again, of course, like always there's the option to step away from it, but to really go in good faith and try to work with Chronicle. And that was such good advice because I think it worked out so well after that. And I've been so happy with Chronicle. And also, you know, when I came back to Maddie, who's my editor, amazing person. And I was like, hey, I have an agent now and it's David Black. It really also kind of like helped because people know him, they trust him. I think all around it really helped smooth the process along.
Can I ask about the proposal? How many drafts did you go through before you submitted?
Geez, I don't remember. How many, Peter?
I don't think I did that many drafts on this one, actually. It's also hard to say because I was kind of editing it fluidly, but I would say really probably like a total of like 3 versions of it. I had the benefit of at least having that initial conversation with Maddie, with Chronicle, about the concept. So I knew that they were interested in the overall vision. The only like refinements I made on it were more, again, on that sort of like business side of how the book sells. To David's point, I think one thing that's important for listeners to know about me is that I don't really have a platform. You know, like I have a pretty small following on social media, but I do have subject matter expertise in the sense that I've cooked with instant ramen my entire life. And then I started the Museum of Food and Drink. And so I have an understanding, and I'm culinarily trained and all that. So I have an understanding of how this all works and the sort of cultural context of it. But in this case, Chronicle really bought onto the vision behind the book rather than thinking that I'm going to get these like legions of followers who are zealously following me to do, whatever I say that they should do. I simply don't have that. And so this definitely was an example of aligning on the vision.
Peter did a great job of articulating the book that he wanted to write. When you're working with a publisher and working with a place like Chronicle, what you know you're going to get is a beautiful book. Each publisher has its own culture. Each publisher has its own production values, their own mechanisms to get books into stores. A book like this is a book that will thrive in special markets, thrive in small places. And we've already begun to see that prior to publication. That's a strength of selling to Chronicle. One has to be truly aware of that. One of the things that's really interesting about cookbooks is that the special markets for cookbooks is really where they can thrive. And if I were to have any really big criticism of a lot of big publishers, it is that they do not invest as deeply as particularly with cookbooks, as they should in special markets. Workman and Artisan for years thrived because they would sell books around the country in 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4 to all of these little stores. You could look at the published numbers on Bookscan, which presents the numbers, sort of people can subscribe to that to see how many copies actually sell. But the numbers you would see from Workman and Artisan were a fraction of what were ultimately sold because they would sell in these small markets, which would not be picked up by Bookscan.
Yeah.
Chronicle was second to Workman in the way that they could reach a market. So for somebody like Peter, first book, they will likely sell a lot more copies in these markets. And so when we decide to go back with another book, hopefully, we will have the leverage of the number of copies sold with the goal of maintaining the relationship. But if we don't maintain the relationship, we'll have that number of copies sold. So it'll be helpful for us to go elsewhere.
Yeah. We had Sarah Billingsley on the podcast. She talked about being able to see a book, envision where it's being sold. And Kate and I were talking about, I just feel like Instant Ramen Kitchen is such a high concept cookbook. And then we got into trying to define what that means. And I'm not even sure I know
what is high concept.
I don't even really know what that means, but it just feels like it's so thought out. The way it's structured, the way it's designed, the way it's like all these pieces put together. And it's hard to imagine it not being a Chronicle book.
Right.
Right. It kind of hits you in the head, right? You hear Instant Ramen Kitchen. Okay, I get it.
And then you open it up and you see these
Yeah.
graphics that
Mm-hmm.
do the same thing, the through line, and we'll get into some of the design and how that happened. But, something as simple as the font and the through line of the wavy noodles, and it just hits you over the head. Yeah.
Peter, one thing I wanted to ask you is in the introduction, in the front matter of the book, you say, it's no exaggeration to say that my culinary identity has been built on a foundation of noodle cakes and seasoning sachets. When I read the introduction to this book, it feels like this was a fully formed concept that you had. Was your introduction, was it pretty close to what you had in the proposal, or did things change when you were writing the book?
I have to say, yeah, in the front matter, it's very similar to what I had in my proposal, because the very short version of it is that my parents were immigrant entrepreneurs. They had Hallmark stores. I was in the Midwest, and I was a latchkey kid. The business was actually in the next town over, and so they would have to close up the store at like 9 o'clock and then drive back home. And I was home alone. And so I spent a lot of time by myself, mostly eating frozen food, canned food, convenience foods. I mean, I grew up on industrial convenience food. Like, that is my makeup, for better or for worse. Instant ramen was the only one that invited me to actually try adding other things and to experiment with it. And so that's how my sort of cooking journey started. And then everything comes out from there. So, all my whole career in food was built on those initial first steps.
One of the things that's wonderful about this idea, too, is that it appeals to such a broad range of people. It appeals to people who have been cooking with instant ramen for decades and decades. I do remember instant ramen when I was in college, Peter, but I was in college so long ago, I barely remember that.
Yeah.
It's the concept that you can then take that and use it as a foundation for something a little different.
Or a lot different in many cases. Yeah.
Or a lot different. If you think about the demographic that then comes to a book like this, it's a lot of different generations who sort of say, this is kind of great. This is what I remember. I've cooked like this, and this is interesting to me.
Thank you to the Local Palette for supporting this episode. If you're a regular Everything Cookbooks listener, that means you probably really love cookbooks. So I want to tell you about the Local Palette Cookbook Club, a space that celebrates everything cookbooks. They have a digital library with exclusive cookbook author interviews, seasonal roundups, reviews, and of course, plenty of recipes. Members receive weekly newsletters, discounts to their marketplace, access to events, and the chance to win cookbooks and kitchen swag. Membership makes a great gift for cookbook-loving friends and families, and there are even a few membership tiers to choose from. You can find more details by clicking on their link in our show notes. And don't forget to mention that Everything Cookbook sent you. I feel like every good cookbook has to have a serious drive behind it, almost a call to action. And you've got a couple things going here. One, it's so we don't think of it as just dorm food, right? Because I'm with you, David. I dabbled with it a little bit when I was very hungry, and all I had was a hot plate.
They didn't have hot plates when I went to school.
Yeah, I don't think I did either. I might have had a tea kettle.
You still were cooking with like a wood fire in your dorm room?
Pretty
David?
much. Right? Pretty much. Yeah.
I studied by candlelight.
Yes, we did. I wrote my first book with a quill pen. Yes.
When I studied.
Yeah. Well, that's another conversation. But also this idea of getting people to become more improvisational cooks.
Yeah.
Which is something that I know a lot of cookbook authors talk about and recipe writers talk about. It's difficult to do. And you mentioned earlier that there were more recipes at one point in the book than there are now. Now there are 40. You call them
recipe templates.
Right.
Templates, yeah.
And that's the thing, too. You say in the book, this is not a cookbook. I mean, it's kind of a hot take to come out with a cookbook and say it's not a cookbook. So, tell us about the recipe situation.
So this is quite the personal journey I went through, but I'm a musician and I grew up playing, piano and violin, Suzuki method and whatnot. And for most of my life, I would play songs just as they were meant to be played off of sheet music or, off of guitar tabs or whatnot. And recently, around the time when I was starting to work on this book, I started going to a lot of jam sessions and doing more improvisational music. It was really this kind of aha moment about the palpable difference between doing something off of sheet music versus being in a situation where you just kind of let the energy flow and you're listening to each other, you're being creative. It sometimes goes a wrong direction, sometimes goes in really great directions, but no matter what, based on the process, the output is something that feels really uniquely you and very creative and very satisfying, no matter if the music was good or not. I think I took that for granted in the kitchen because I've been cooking my entire life. So I cook very improvisationally. And so it almost took me being in a different context where I didn't have that comfort to kind of remind myself of that line you can cross to go from doing something, you know, off the page versus something improvisationally. That whole process on my music side helped inform me wanting to take the book in a different direction. And I remember there was one point at which we were already in the process of developing the book, and I reached out to Maddie, my editor, being like, I have a thought. And I was like, I kind of want to reorient the book and make it much more methodological than it was going to be previously. And it was always going to have a heavy methodology element to it. But I was like, I kind of want this to be mostly methodological and less about recipes and just following directions. Again, I mean, to Chronicle and to Maddie's credit, they thought it over. We talked about it a lot, and we decided to go in this direction. Indeed, if there's anything I want people to take out of this book, it's really about the freedom to play in the kitchen, you know? I think that there is kind of just like a cognitive barrier for early cooks where you just don't know whether something's going to work well together. If you have one little setback, it might be the reminder, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm going to follow the recipes, you know? I think based on my life experience with instant ramen, you know, I started cooking with it probably when I was like 9 or 10 years old, you know, so very young. I was making delicious food with it. And that's the thing about instant ramen, that was my kind of aha moment with the book, was instant ramen all but ensures deliciousness. You have the umami, you have the seasoning, you have a basic set of aromatics and flavors from the seasoning sachet. You also have the backbone of the dish taken care of via the noodles. So you don't even have to worry about the sort of nourishing part of it. It's going to have the calories you need to make it into a meal. So what's left is really the flavor identity of where you want to take it. I think anybody who has cooked a lot improvisationally in the kitchen knows that pretty much anything can work together, you know? So my thought is that instant ramen is almost like that flotation device that lets you just sort of like dive in and then grab whatever you want and put it in. So a lot of like what's in the methodological book, part of my book, and I always qualify things by saying this is one way to look at it, but you can do it other ways. But I'm always just giving people permission to just grab things almost willy-nilly from their pantry or refrigerator, put it in, and then, as I say, you know, taste what happens.
Hearing you speak, I love the idea of a flotation device, that the instant ramen is a flotation device for what you're trying to get across. And the whole instant flavor bank chapter or section of the book, I mean, that alone could apply to so many different types of cooking. But at the same time, I can't imagine there being another vehicle that could support this kind of book. Like, instant ramen is so iconic and so culturally loaded. There's so much around it that, and maybe there is, I just lack imagination, but you've also made it so this book could only be about instant ramen. It's not really a question. It's just sort of, I marvel at how well constructed this book is.
It feels so obvious now. It's like inevitable, but yet getting to this inevitability is not easy, right? Because you start writing a book and there's so many options. And then to narrow it down and get to that inevitability takes some doing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously preaching to the choir here, but I do think that instant ramen sits at a really unique intersection because it's cheap, it's fast, it's reliably delicious to such a degree, and I point this out in the book, that a child can make it and a Michelin-starred chef could enjoy the bowl of food that the child has made. And I don't think there's many foods where that's actually true. Also, it's a cultural staple, you know, and that's one thing, that's where I bring in that message about it not being just dorm food. I think for anybody who doesn't come from a culture where instant ramen is just a part of like daily life, it is easy to like instant ramen, but also be dismissive of it as being, dorm food or whatnot. And that's something I think might be illuminating for people, is to realize that actually instant ramen isn't just dorm food. It's, you know, like I said in the book, it's food. My parents eat it. You know, when we get together as a family, we really love having our instant ramen meal at some point together, you know, and it's just kind of a part of our own little mini food culture. And I think for a lot of people that'll resonate. And I'm not even talking about Asian cultures. That's the thing. It's like in Nigeria, in Brazil, you know, in Mexico, in all sorts of cultures, instant ramen plays a really key sort of cultural role. And so, yeah, I just love that it sits at the intersection of all of these things. It's obviously I'm very passionate about instant ramen.
David, I wanted to ask you a question about what you're seeing in cookbooks in terms of recipes, because one thing that is great about the Instant Ramen Kitchen is that the recipes are very easy to read. They're on one page most of the time. I feel like there's been this shift in what cookbook buyers want in recipes. And for a while, these chef cookbooks, you could get away with really long recipes. And now it seems like there's this curtailing of those long recipes. For you on the agent side, I mean, when you see a book like this, you're like, yes, because I see the recipes. Or is there a lot of room for lots of different types of difficulty level?
It's a good question, Kate. I think that the reality is that in some ways this book is a chef's dream or a cookbook writer's dream in that it is so adaptable. The two of you have written cookbooks, right? How many cookbooks would you love to write where you don't have to actually write a recipe? If you talk to any cook or any chef who's ever written a cookbook, they say, I want to put a list of ingredients down and let people figure it out. That's not quite what's here, but there is an enormous amount of room and flexibility for a cook. But in terms of what people are looking for, in terms of publishers are looking for, they're looking for accessibility. The most important thing is the home cook has to be able to make this. You know, when I talk to people, I mean, increasingly, publishers for a period of time have run away in the last few years from restaurant books and from chefs' books. They don't want to publish those books because they don't see that they see the restaurants as too regional or too local. They see the chefs as not having a broad enough platform. So what they want is they want an author who has a platform, which is why they've turned to influencers and people who have blogs or Substacks or the like, and then try to reach their audiences. Now, in many of those instances, not all, but many of those instances, a lot of those books, they will be sold based on the number of followers that somebody has, and then the author goes out and hires a recipe developer, okay, because they don't have the catalog of recipes to work with. My feeling, as I've been, looking at this over the last few years, is to double down and go to chefs, go to people who really have the knowledge to bring flavor out of food. Then have the conversation with them that says, look, I don't have an army of people at home for mise en place. I don't have an army of people at home to do dishes. So you got to make this adaptable and accessible. And I have to be able to go to my local Piggly Wiggly to be able to buy the ingredients. When you talk to people who have great culinary training, they will often say to you, well, you can just get it on Amazon. I said, I don't want
I've heard that so many times.
I don't want to get it on Amazon.
Right. And the reality, right, Kate, is you hear it all the time. But the thing is, I want to make a meal tonight. I don't want to make a meal on Thursday. And so I'm not waiting for my Amazon Prime account to get me the ingredients tomorrow so I can make it on Thursday. What do I have in my pantry? How can I make it work? If I don't have it, what can I substitute? It's not that difficult. When the cookbook craze started and it exploded in part because people were looking at what all of these chefs were cooking and saying, oh my God, that's so beautiful. Then they realized they could never achieve what that was. So when you talk to chefs at this point, you can say to them, yes, you can include some recipes that a home cook can aspire to. But other than that, what you want to share your flavor profile. And this is what Peter does so brilliantly here, is he's sharing the flavor profile that people can adapt to. And if when you're talking to a restaurant chef, it's like,
right, you're not going to
it's not supposed to be the same thing. You can't recreate it.
No.
And you don't want to. You want it to be close enough. So when that person then walks into your restaurant and eats the food that you have created with your army of cooks, and it blows you away you go back home and say, yeah, that tastes a bit, what I did tastes a bit like what I had.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the same thing.
We talk about recipe parameters quite a bit and how they, in many ways, can help you as a recipe developer. Both Peter and David, what you have structured, I mean, one pot, one burner, 20 minutes or less. You use the entire instant ramen packet, which I love that. It's not like throw away. I fully expected when I started it that you were going to have us throwing away, half the sachet or the sachet. Maximum 10 ingredients, all commonly available, as you're saying, David. Nothing has to be special ordered. And a lot of them also rely on, leftovers you have around. And then they all fit on one page because there's only 40 of them. Every recipe gets a photo. I mean, those are some pretty strict guardrails that you've set up, but your home cooks, are going to appreciate every single one of those.
Yeah, I mean, that was in part a reaction to some instant ramen recipes I'd seen online where it might be a chef, but they talk about how to quote unquote elevate your instant ramen or chef it up or whatever. And I really hate these concepts because I don't understand why you need to elevate anything necessarily. But anyway, and then you see that the recipe requires 45 minutes, 3 different pots, your saucepan, and then all this preparation on the side. I'm just like, why are you cooking with instant ramen at this point? It's like you've totally missed the point of what instant ramen's about, which is simplicity, speed, accessibility.
And great flavor.
And great flavor, of course, yeah. And so that list you just read, Molly, is just actually, I thought about like, okay, I need to set rules for myself for developing the recipes. And that was the list I came up with. There's one exception where I didn't adhere to it, but
there's an oven, right?
Yeah, there's an oven involved. But I was like, there's one thing that you can't do on the stovetop, and that's brown cheese. And I was like, it's just a shame that I have one recipe in there where the cheese is browned, So like,
well, at least you didn't make us get a blowtorch to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Question: did you get any pushback on the one single serving?
There was never an issue with it, actually. Interestingly enough, it's true, because it also is an unusual feature of this book, is that they're all single-serving recipes. Although I do point out that if you augment it with some side dishes, one of these can be split into 2 as a main. But no, I don't know. It's like, I guess maybe part of it is because there's kind of an implicit understanding that instant ramen is a single-serving thing. I mean, I do have instructions in the book for how to double it. But yeah, I never got any pushback. It's curious.
Well, I didn't realize that instant ramen and cup of noodles had this similar origin. I learned a lot.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, reading this book.
Before we let you go, we also really need to talk about the graphics.
Yeah.
How did that all come together?
I think this is where my museum background comes in. Whenever we did exhibitions, we had to think about how to graphically show ideas. And I love the way that a graphic can convey so much more information so much more quickly than words on their own can. I think in my proposal, I didn't have any graphics in it in that sense, but I had mentioned that I would want to have charts like that. Soon into when we were developing the content for the book, I did little like pencil sketches of all of the kinds of charts I wanted to do. Believe it or not, there were many more that I wanted to include in. But yeah, I did pencil sketches, and I would send those to Maddie. Then Maddie would look at it with the designer, and then I mean, I have to say that was another thing that was incredible about working with Chronicle is the in-house designer they have there did such a phenomenal job of improving on my pencil sketches and really taking the idea and making them shine. So yeah, that was always a part of like how I envisioned the book.
You have a kimchi calculator on your website that I've sent many people to.
Oh yeah.
I can see the evolution from that to these sort of more sophisticated design elements.
I like to think of myself as like a systems thinker. Like I'm way more interested in thinking about a formula or a system that will solve a wide range of problems versus like a specific solution to one little thing. That kimchi calculator, by the way, I did that just randomly during the pandemic because I was like getting so frustrated with making kimchi where like sometimes it turned out okay, sometimes it wouldn't. And I had basically the kind of classic process of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, taste and see. And the thing about it is that like sometimes, especially when you're pickling something, it just really is a shame when it doesn't turn out right because you've invested all this time and then it takes, weeks for it to ferment to the level you want it at. And so, yeah, I put that together and it's gotten quite big.
I don't know. Sounds like could be another book in the works, but I won't put that idea in your head.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask David a question just on the industry itself. You've seen cookbooks kind of blow up. You've seen them in this stage they're in now with the influencers. What do you think are the most significant changes right now that, say, aspiring cookbook authors should be paying attention to?
That's a really interesting question. My feeling is that what I am starting to see with publishers is the pendulum is swinging. Pendulum always sort of goes in different directions. It went to influencers and to bloggers and to book talkers and the like. They've found that those books work for a short period of time. They don't work for a long period of time. And the fundamental tenet of cookbook publishing has always been that they are great backlist titles. What I mean by backlist is that they'll sell year over year every year. Peter's book is a book that you can imagine people giving to every college student they've ever seen or ever known, or every kid going off to college for generations to come. It is the definition of a backlist title. And backlist books have been, as I say, the foundation of publishers' revenue streams for years. Even if they overspend for a book, if they spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars and they don't earn it, they write it off. They write off what they didn't earn. Then what ends up happening, those books continue to sell, and it becomes a consistent revenue stream. A lot of these books of the moment are not going to work as the years go on. And so all the money that they're investing, which they could write off and then be okay because the books were continuing to sell, they're in trouble. They're in big trouble because those books are going to stop selling within a year and a half's worth of time. And the whole foundation upon which their businesses are built is going to start crumbling. So what I am beginning to see is the pendulum swinging back, and they're looking to be able to buy books that will have a bit more substance and books that may be those backlist titles. The biggest issue is getting attention for those authors, because the reality now is that the traditional ways of getting attention for books is not, even when you get that attention, doesn't necessarily result in traction. That is because we have become so accustomed in so many ways to people getting their content from so many different sources. And so people have to go to, small niches in order to do it. I mean, I would say to Peter, if they can get you 75 different podcasts to do, podcasts like this one, do it, because you don't know who you're reaching. Hopefully we'll reach a group of people today, and hopefully Peter will reach a whole group of people in what he does tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. And that the aggregation of that is going to create the kind of response that creates traction in sales. And what am I seeing? I'm seeing that people are turning back towards people who do have something to say and who may be around tomorrow in a way that some of these other people may not. What is that going to result in? Hopefully it's going to result in books that have a long tail, because it's that long tail that has made the industry work. I'm not bemoaning, the past at all. I'm saying it's very different. You have to be able to work within what's happening now, but you just have to be adaptable. And substance counts for something.
That's super helpful. And since, Peter, we have you here, we have people listening.
Right.
A few. No, we have a good listenership, and we love our community. You want to share what you're working on now besides your new book?
So right now I'm actually launching a new company called The Infinite Table. It is a dining venture that brings together 360-degree video and storytelling and food to transport you around the world. And so it's called The Infinite Table. I'm raising money for it right now, and hopefully we'll get it open next year. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And now all kinds of other side projects.
It's going to be really exciting.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Peter, you're definitely a multi-hyphenate in the best kind of way.
Yes.
Congratulations on the Instant Ramen Kitchen. Thanks for coming on to talk about how you both sort of work together to get this book to market. And I'm really excited to see what happens with it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Such an honor to be on here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. If you have a question, a comment, guest suggestion, or if you're interested in sponsorship opportunities, contact us through our website, everythingcookbooks.com. While you're there, check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other merch, or buy us a round of coffee. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Books mentioned on the show are available at our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen and leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Thanks to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.